world finally said it out loud. From the hospitals of Canada to the shipyards of Korea, from Silicon Valley's startups to the UAE's skyscrapers, Filipinos aren't just working in the system anymore, they're running it quietly, brilliantly, relentlessly. For decades, the world underestimated the Filipino spirit. Now, they're studying it because wherever something needs saving, a company, a city, a dream, a Filipino is already there, holding it together. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments and I will give you a heart. For decades, the world called Filipinos helpers, workers, nurses, and maids, but no one called them what they truly were, builders of civilization, the ones who show up when everyone else quits, the ones who keep systems alive when nations fall asleep. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't politics, it was survival, quiet, steady, relentless survival. And somehow, that very instinct turned into power, because while other countries were arguing about policy, Filipinos were busy running the world's infrastructure from the inside out. Let's start with the truth that's been sitting in plain sight. More than 12.5 million Filipinos are working overseas today. That's 12.5 million ambassadors of competence, compassion, and grit, scattered across 190 countries, from London to Riyadh, from Tokyo to Toronto. And together, they generate over $36 billion, 0 cents USD in remittances every year. That's not just money, that's muscle. That's an economy built on heart, funding schools, hospitals, and futures. To put it simply, the Filipino diaspora isn't a side story in global labor, it's the backbone of it. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about a shift in power dynamics no one saw coming. You see, while the world built walls, Filipinos built trust. While global superpowers scrambled for talent, we were already everywhere, filling the cracks, mastering the systems, and earning respect, one impossible job at a time. Think about it. Canada's hospitals, Japan's factories, the UAE's airlines, and South Korea's shipyards all share one quiet secret. Without Filipinos, the lights go out. In fact, during the 2024 healthcare crisis, a Canadian minister openly admitted, if not for Filipino nurses, our system would have collapsed. That's not flattery, that's surrender. That's acknowledgement that the Filipino work ethic has become an international stabilizer. And here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't by accident. The world didn't hand Filipinos a stage, we built it plank by plank. Generations of OFWs traded comfort for opportunity, distance for dignity, and somehow they didn't just survive abroad, they infiltrated excellence. The Filipino way of working became a global model, adaptable but unstoppable. In the Middle East, airlines now use Filipino staff as the gold standard for customer service. Emirates and Qatar Airways have training modules literally based on Filipino hospitality. In Singapore, household management schools teach Filipino care culture. And in South Korea, the Ministry of Labor designed its seasonal workforce strategy around Filipino recruitment because no other nationality balances skill and integrity quite the same way. But here's what nobody talks about. The intelligence behind the humility. The world sees smiles, but misses the strategy. Every Filipino working abroad is part of a silent network, one that shares jobs, protects each other, and circulates opportunity faster than most governments do. It's not an organization, it's a mindset. When one Filipino gets hired, they pull 3 more with them. When one family thrives, they lift an entire baran. That's not labor migration, that's generational leverage. Let me tell you something powerful. The International Monetary Fund once called the Philippines a remittance-dependent economy. What they failed to realize is that those remittances are investments in education, in skill, in reputation, and those investments are paying dividends. The kids of those workers, the ones who grew up watching their parents send money home, are now the ones leading hospitals, tech firms, and embassies. The helpers raised the next generation of leaders. The world just didn't notice the baton pass. And now, the irony? The same countries that once employed Filipinos as laborers are now hiring them as consultants, engineers, and executives. Filipino architects are building Dubai's skyline. Filipino scientists are leading AI labs in Canada. Filipino doctors are running hospitals in the UK. We used to be exported talent, now we're essential infrastructure. Here's the uncomfortable truth for the rest of the world. It's not that Filipinos suddenly got better, it's that the world finally ran out of excuses to ignore them. While other nations built machines, Filipinos built meaning. And that's something you can't replace with automation. You can train a robot to calculate, but not to care. You can't program kindness, and that's where Filipinos hold the unfair advantage. But the real plot twist, the global power shift, isn't happening in parliaments or boardrooms. It's happening in break rooms, hospitals, and classrooms, where Filipinos quietly lead by example. Their influence is cultural, emotional, and human, exactly the kind of power that lasts. So now in 2025, the phrase Filipino worker doesn't just mean a person, it means a system that works. It means efficiency, compassion, and accountability rolled into one heartbeat. And the world is finally connecting the dots. When the pandemic broke global supply chains, who held it together? Filipinos. When countries faced aging populations, who cared for their elderly? Filipinos. When disaster struck and chaos followed, from Beirut to British Columbia, who was always first on the ground and last to leave? Filipinos. You see, the impossible was never really impossible for us. The rest of the world just needed time to catch up. But here's the real kicker. We didn't take over through politics or protest. We did it through purpose, quietly, consistently, with the kind of discipline that doesn't trend on social media, but changes entire systems in real life. The world may have built walls of status and class, but Filipinos found the doors. And once they walked through, they held them open for everyone else. That's how you run the world without saying a word. Comment Proud Pinoy if you believe this isn't just a rise, it's a revolution made of patience, faith, and unshakable willpower. You know what's funny? The world talks about globalization like it's some grand economic theory. But in reality, globalization has a face, and that face looks unmistakably Filipino. Brown skin, easy smile, eyes that have seen struggle but refuse to look away from hope. Filipinos didn't just join globalization, they became its engine. The world may have built the machines, but it's Filipinos who keep them running. Let's break this down. Every country in the G20, the world's richest economies, now employs Filipinos in critical roles. Not optional, critical. In 2025, according to the International Labor Organization, Filipino workers account for over 30% of Southeast Asia's total deployed skilled labor abroad. Think about that for a second. That's one nation feeding the global demand for talent, from care to construction, from design to diplomacy. And it didn't happen through slogans or government propaganda. It happened through proof, through people who quietly delivered excellence until the noise of their results drowned out the world's stereotypes. In Canada, Filipino nurses have become the backbone of their national health system, so much so that Toronto hospitals now have dedicated Filipino recruitment programs. In fact, according to Health Canada's 2024 report, Filipino nurses now make up 23% of all new foreign healthcare hires nationwide. One official even said they don't just fill roles, they define them. That's not charity, that's necessity. Meanwhile, in Japan, where respect and precision are cultural currency, Filipino caregivers are redefining elder care. The Japanese government's 2025 Workforce Integration Plan reveals something astonishing. Filipino caregivers have the lowest turnover rate in the entire program. Why? Because they treat patients like family, not clients. In a country built on respect, Filipinos mastered it and returned it tenfold. But here's where things start to get interesting, and maybe a little uncomfortable for the rest of the world. While nations brag about self-reliance, behind the curtain, they rely on Filipino labor to keep the lights on. It's the global version of don't bite the hand that feeds you, except now the hand is wearing a pair of worn-out gloves and still managing to send money home. You see, every OFW is more than an employee. They're an unofficial diplomat. They carry with them not just skill, but values that ripple through workplaces. Employers notice, companies adapt, cultures evolve. Slowly, Filipino excellence becomes not just a compliment, it becomes policy. Take South Korea. The Hyundai Heavy Industries shipyard, one of the biggest in the world, depends heavily on Filipino welders and engineers. In 2024, their own internal audit admitted something shocking. Productivity dipped by 18% during months when Filipino workers were on rotation breaks. Think about that. A global industry leader slowed down because the Filipinos were gone. And while the world's talking AI and automation, here's the twist. No one's figured out how to automate compassion. Filipino workers don't just do their jobs, they humanize them. That's the quiet takeover, not through brute force or politics, but through character, through values that make systems sustainable. But let's be brutally honest, it wasn't supposed to be this way. The Filipino dream was never meant to be exported. Parents shouldn't have to miss birthdays just to pay bills. Nurses shouldn't have to heal strangers while their own families wait oceans away. That's the painful irony. The same strength that powers the world also exposes how much the Philippines itself has neglected its heroes. And yet, That's where the story turns poetic. Because instead of breaking under that pain, Filipinos turned it into legacy. Every letter home, every balikbayan box, every tearful airport goodbye became part of something bigger, a silent revolution powered by sacrifice. In Italy, Filipino domestic workers, many undocumented, are now recognized by the Italian labor union as essential caregivers under national law. That means they get benefits, security, and the same legal rights as locals. Do you know what it takes to change labor law in Europe? Consistency, integrity, decades of quiet, undeniable excellence. But here's what the global elites still don't understand. This isn't charity or coincidence. It's cause and effect. When you treat work like worship, the world can't ignore you forever. Filipinos didn't wait for permission to matter. They earned it. One shift, one patient, one overtime hour at a time. Now think about what that means for the next generation. The children of those OFWs who grew up watching their parents rise from struggle now carry an entirely different energy. Confident, bilingual, globally aware. These are the Filipinos the world will deal with next. Educated abroad, emotionally resilient, and proudly rooted in values money can't buy. That's the future of Filipino leadership. Not just filling jobs, but creating them. Not just working for systems, but rewriting them. But here's the question no one dares ask. If Filipinos are running the world's engines, who's running home? If we've built skyscrapers abroad but can't fix our own bridges, what does that say about national priorities? That's the tension no one wants to talk about. The quiet pain behind the global pride. Because while other countries celebrate the Filipino miracle, those back home are still waiting for their share of the reward. And that's where part 3 comes in. The shift from labor to leadership, from recognition to revolution. The part where the world doesn't just rely on Filipinos, it starts following them. But before we get there, type respect in the comments if you believe the world should finally give credit where it's due. Because the Filipino takeover wasn't loud, it was earned. And the world's just starting to realize it. But let's stop pretending this is still about jobs. What's happening right now is far bigger than employment. It's evolution. Filipinos are no longer just part of the global workforce. They're becoming the architects of the next world order, quietly, strategically, without armies, without billion-dollar tech monopolies, and without the arrogance that usually comes with power. And that's exactly why it's working. Here's the twist most global analysts missed. Filipinos don't just adapt to systems, they fix them. You put a Filipino in a broken company, they stabilize it. In a chaotic hospital, they bring calm. In a household falling apart, they restore order. That's not labor, that's leadership disguised as service. And it's writing how the world defines value. Think about it. The United States, a country that practically invented the modern corporate machine, is now facing a massive labor shortage. Healthcare, logistics, and hospitality are collapsing under their own weight. But guess who's holding the line? Filipino nurses, caregivers, IT specialists, and maritime professionals. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics 2025, Filipinos now make up over 5% of America's total healthcare workforce, a staggering figure considering they're less than 1% of the U.S. population. That's not a coincidence. That's a quiet revolution wrapped in scrubs and ID badges. And while the world praises efficiency, Filipinos bring something rarer: empathy. You can't train that, you can't buy that. That's what makes the Filipino global footprint so untouchable. In an era where machines are replacing humans, Filipinos are proving that emotional intelligence is the ultimate competitive edge. But here's where it gets even deeper. This influence isn't just professional, it's cultural. Walk into a Canadian suburb and you'll find Filipino fiestas drawing more locals than official city events. In Dubai, Filipino-led businesses are redefining hospitality standards. In Japan, Filipino engineers are behind the quiet success of renewable energy projects. The Filipino identity is no longer boxed into stereotypes. It's blending, expanding, and evolving into something universal, the blueprint for resilience. And yet, this story has a bittersweet undertone, because while Filipinos build legacies abroad, their homeland still wrestles with the same monsters: corruption, poor governance, and underinvestment in its own people. It's a cruel irony. The world benefits from Filipino brilliance, while the Philippines itself often fails to give that brilliance a reason to come home. But maybe, just maybe, that's about to change. The World Bank's 2025 projection estimates that the Philippines' GDP could grow by 6.5% annually if it fully reintegrates skilled OFWs into domestic industries. That's right, the country's next economic boom isn't hiding in new investors, but in its own people coming back home. And many already are. Filipino professionals returning from Canada, Singapore, and the UAE are founding startups, launching NGOs, and mentoring the next generation. They're not just repatriates, they're reformers. Because after years of seeing how other nations work, they've come home with one shared realization. The Philippines doesn't lack talent, it lacks trust in its own people. That's the next global chapter, turning that trust deficit into a transformation movement. Imagine if the same discipline that runs Tokyo's hospitals or London's train systems was brought back to run our local government offices. Imagine if Filipino engineers who built Dubai's skyline were designing sustainable cities in Cebu or Davao. That's not a dream. That's strategy waiting to be funded. But here's the gut punch. While other countries see Filipinos as their future, too many Filipinos still see themselves as temporary. Balik bayan muna. Balik trabaho ulit. It's a cycle that keeps the nation alive, but never allows it to thrive. That's the loop that needs breaking. And it starts with redefining what success really means for the Filipino people. Because success isn't just leaving, it's returning with knowledge, with dignity, with purpose. The world is already watching. Canadian lawmakers recently called the Filipino community an indispensable pillar of their society. South Korean news networks now highlight Filipino students excelling in Korean universities. In Saudi Arabia, officials openly acknowledged that their healthcare and hospitality sectors would collapse within months without Filipino workers. And Japan just signed a 5-year agreement expanding skilled labor visas, specifically prioritizing Filipino workers, citing their unmatched reliability. That's not charity, that's recognition. So here's the truth most people are too polite to say. The world needs Filipinos more than Filipinos need the world. Let that sink in. Because the Filipino way of working, patient, passionate, purpose-driven, is what the future demands. We're entering an age where humanity itself is the rarest resource, and guess who's already mastered it? The Filipino doesn't just work hard, they work with heart. That's why they lead without shouting, influence without demanding, and succeed without betraying their values. And now the world, even the most advanced nations, are quietly asking the same question: how do they do it? Here's how. They see work not as duty, but as destiny. They carry the weight of sacrifice with grace. They find joy in exhaustion, meaning in responsibility, and pride in humility. They are, quite literally, the spiritual infrastructure of globalization. And as the rest of the world scrambles to rebuild, from political chaos and economic uncertainty, one truth is echoing louder than ever. The Filipino doesn't just survive storms, they rebuild after them. So maybe this isn't just about who runs the world today, maybe it's about who saves it tomorrow. And if that's true, then the world's not just admitting it anymore, it's finally standing up to applaud. Type vision in the comments if you believe the future won't just be powered by Filipinos, it'll be defined by them. Because when the world needed strength, compassion, and resilience all in one, it didn't find a superpower, it found a people. And those people were Filipino.